I want to welcome everybody to this month's business program. I'm really pleased to have such a big turnout, and I'm very much looking forward to this timely and important conversation on anti-racism. Before we get started, I want to take just a moment to provide an update on things that are happening at the MJCC. As most of you know, we're continuing to expand our offerings as we are permitted to do so by the state. We've now reopened both the warm pool and the lap pool. Those are available by reservation, and we just recently increased the number of hours during which both pools are open. We also have restarted our soccer league program for adults, and starting next week, we're launching an after-school camp from 3 to 6 each day, Monday through Friday. All of this is in addition to the ongoing virtual programs such as this that we're continuing to offer. So I hope that you'll engage with us in a variety of different ways, and I hope you'll stay abreast of the increases in offerings that we are planning in the coming weeks and months. Again, thank you so much for being here today, and it's my pleasure to turn things over to the president of the Jay's Board of Directors, Jason Zeidel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us at today's PDX Business Series event. My name's Jason Zeidel, and I'm the president of the MJCC Board of Directors and a proud member of the J. Thank you for your support of the MJCC by attending today's program. Your support helps us to continue to offer engaging programming like this and is greatly appreciated. I'd like to thank our sponsors. Presenting sponsor, Congregation Neve Shalom, COVID-19 Outreach and Services. Our series sponsors, Richard Barker, Wealth Management Advisor of Merrill Lynch, Barry and Carla Benson, First Republic Bank, Gewurz Menashe, Portland State University, Jonathan Singer of Barg Singer PC, the Jerry and Helen Stern Grandchildren's Fund of OJCF, Turner Construction Company, and our event sponsor, Income Property Management Company. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Rabbi Benjamin Barnett. Prior to joining Havurah Shalom in August 2017, Benjamin Barnett served as the rabbi of Beit Am, a pluralistic Jewish community in Corvallis. Originally from the Chicago area, he received his BA in English from the University of Michigan and his rabbinic ordination from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in Philadelphia. In leading a diverse congregation, Rabbi Barnett draws from years of living and learning in Jewish communities across the religious spectrum. He works to build relationships across religious and cultural lines in the name of creating a less violent world. Rabbi Benjamin?
Thank you, Jason. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. So thank you for the invitation. And I'm just going to share a few words here before passing it off to our speakers, Barbara and Karen, who I'll introduce in just a moment. And I'll say a lot of the program is going to be the two of them sharing, and then opportunity for us to be having conversation together. And there will be a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. So throughout, if you have questions that arise for you, invite you to put them in the chat, and I'll just say our apologies up front that a lot of questions won't be able to be addressed, but hopefully they will be in some form, and at least a couple of them will be. So what I'd like to say is, as we enter into this program today, is that this is our work. This is our work, each of our work, no matter whether we are Black or white or what racial or ethnic identities we have, that to engage in anti-racism is to help our nation and our society become something that it has yet to be. And it's really for all of us, I'd like to suggest to find our place in the story of race and racism and anti-racism in our society. And I'll share briefly, I've shared, folks in my community have heard me talk about before the powerful impact that the book, The Warmth of Other Suns, had on me, a book by a journalist, Isabel Wilkerson. And I believe Barbara and Karen may reference her recent book, Cast. And what was powerful for me about that book, in short, is that it describes the great migration of African Americans from the South to the North and Western United States. And one of the stories that it follows is a woman who goes from Mississippi to eventually the South Side of Chicago. And She actually was a woman named Ida, born in 1913, and my maternal grandmother was a woman named Ida, born in 1913, actually born in the south side of Chicago, and lived in the same neighborhood that this woman, Ida Mae Gladney, eventually moved into. And it was a fascinating thing for me to read. I was so fascinated by it until I realized that my grandmother, my grandparents, and then my parents after them actually moved out of that neighborhood that Ida Mae Gladney eventually moved into. And so in other words, I found myself in that story, not in the place that I wanted to be. Actually, I sort of felt like, wow, I'm a little bit in the wrong side of that story, so to speak. In other words, that I realized in that moment, it was another realization for me, the ways in which I benefited from a system of white supremacy. But it was a powerful experience for me to be able to deepen my work in aspiring to do anti-racism work in the world, having that personal connection. And that's what I want to offer, is that for those of us who are Jewish and white, that we may be vulnerable as Jews while at the same time benefiting from a system of white supremacy that's woven into the fabric of our entire society. And I'd like to offer that as an invitation and a challenge for all of those of us in the Jewish community who are white. And this is Jewish work. And I want to hold up that to name what should be the obvious, but isn't always, is that we're not all white in the Jewish community. That B'chol Lashon, actually an organization that is devoted to diversity in the Jewish community, already almost 20 years ago in their study estimated that 20% of US Jews are racially and ethnically diverse. So that's 1 out of every 5 Jews in the United States. And so when we look at our communities, the extent to which we may not have a lot of people of color within them, maybe it's upon us to ask, what are we doing that's not really opening those doors? And so I invite that for us in the Jewish community to reflect as we hear our presentation today, what that might look like for us, not just doing the work out there, but really within our own communities, and really starting with our own selves. And so with that, the work of anti-racism, I'm going to pass off to Barbara O'Hare and Karen Haberman Trusty. So Barbara O'Hare is the daughter of a Nazarene minister who was a survivor of the Jim Crow South and the Great Migration. And this has shaped her worldview on the humanistic value of undoing racism for the past 30 years. She's been a recipient of Portland racism and Portland blessings that permeate the fabric of this community and the nation. Although for 26 years she experienced international cultures as an account executive for United Airlines, she understands comparatively what Portland politeness sometimes means and the overt Portland resistance to racial justice. She co-founded Beyond Diversity, LLC. Barbara was trained by Oregon Uniting to understand racism as a facilitator and trainer using the self-awareness model. And Karen Haberman Trusty is a longtime, many decades, ally and anti-racist that worked for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1963 in Atlanta, and then was on staff with SNCC in 1964 in Mississippi. She attended a historically Black college as an exchange student and graduated from Harvard with a BA Magna Cum Laude in social relations, and has been doing this work for those many decades as an ally. So with that, I turn over first to Barbara O'Hare.
Thank you, Rabbi Benjamin and Saul and Aaron Fish for inviting us to be a part of this great circle with the Middleman Jewish Community Center during their lunch hour. It is our pleasure to be here. Becoming an anti-racist is a big job, but we have, as the rabbi has already stated, a moral imperative to do so. This conversation today is not about shaming or blaming. And I personally don't believe that white people today are responsible for the caste systems that were put in place starting in 1619, even if they are the beneficiaries. They are, however, responsible for what happens in their lifetime, and that includes holding systems in place that undermine and marginalize others. The feelings of guilt today will not be helpful, so if you want to feel guilty, you get 2 minutes today, and then that's it, and then we move forward, because that's the only way forward. Today's information is meant to be educational and inspirational. What you choose to do with it is your call. You do not have to pretend that you are free of racism to be an anti-racist. Anti-racism work is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including yourself. And fighting racism requires us to acknowledge that racism even exists and that we have been socialized into distorted perceptions of self and our group. A great tennis player once said, "Let's start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can." And that tennis player was Arthur Ashe. So let's keep our expectations in line today with the short amount of time we have, and know that we will not be able to do brain surgery in our first year of medical school, but we can interpret and interrupt our complacency and our complicitness in what is happening in our country, in our city today. We're not going to undo years of human programming and social engineering that hold racism in place just by doing workshops and reading a few books. Our moves and our motives must become personal, and we are a work in progress, and humans have created these caste systems that we labor under or flourish under, and we can undo them and recreate them. We are in a very nice space right now in terms of at least acknowledgement and recognition. And so I'm going to make a few suggestions right off the bat that you might want to consider on your journey to become an anti-racist. Number one, change the narrative. Change the narrative that's been deposited into our belief systems and core constitutions that race even exists. It's a social construct, but our programming tells us that race or our skin color has great value from ages 0 to 9. A lot of what we're laboring under or flourishing under is situational behavior and social engineering. Our ethnic groups and skin color do not specifically drive integrity, academic skills, and drive. If you study history behind these borders, or beyond these borders prior to 1619, you will have some pleasant discoveries about other ethnic groups, including yours, with scientific discoveries, societal achievements, and durability. And if you think you cannot be programmed or haven't been programmed, and that's really the culprit here, then if you haven't seen Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes with Jane Elliott, she shows you that children can be programmed in 24 hours. So we have a lot of baggage to undo, and just give yourself a big fat break in knowing that it's going to take a little time. So number two, let's change the narrative that's been handed down through social engineering in our textbooks and in the media. And these two mediums say that certain ethnic groups are sneaky, certain ethnic groups are dishonest. One is more prone to criminality. This one's smarter. This one's lazy. This one's industrious. This one's inventive. This one is not human. And the list goes on. So in your strive to become anti-racist, start educating yourself. And when you find a fact that you find interesting, check for other resources for agreement about the same information to make sure it's not fake news or not a part of revisionistic history or sources that are just winding us up. So that's number two. Number three, caste or roles have been socially engineered with distorted perceptions for the purposes of favoring those in power or not, starting early in the history of the United States. And they disfavor or favor people. We've all been told early on, if you're a baby boomer, to disfavor indigenous people. And if you're a millennial, you've been told to disfavor the Latinx immigrants. Unfortunately, those that hold middle ground have been silent and cajoled and stoked by fear and have maintained the systems that they are not truly a part of. That would be like, you're not really a part of the 1%ers. If you are, good for you. But obviously, the most disfavored are African Americans, and the most favored are European Americans. And we can tell on the outcomes of systems like income, housing, banking, and education. Number four, let's begin by telling the truth about the United States history and take a look at the propaganda that we export about who we think we are. If you traveled, you must know what other people think of us and what they know about us that we may not know about ourselves. It's always refreshing to leave your home base and your enclave, your cultural enclave of being an American. So we have the best chance of any nation to become a true democracy, but we need to be honest by looking at our outcomes that tell us where we've been and educating ourselves and stop having unreality checks. Number 5, let's start evaluating our outcomes. And where we've been always tells us, well, our outcomes always tell us where we've been. So really evaluate the real reasons why Black folks have worked for 250 years, 15 hours a day for free to build someone else's wealth, and then were legislated out of the receivership of the bounty. Think about the fallaciousness of the stigma of being lazy after you just heard 250 years of free labor, 15 hours a day. Think about how all of these sayings about people that are outside of our ethnic, cultural, or religious enclave have been stigmatized, and it's very much a part of our subconscious, whether we can admit to it or not, or whether or not we know that it's going on in the background. Also, think about the oppositeness of whites in early America that taught slaves how to read, even though it was against the law. They were abolitionists against slavery, and they helped people escape through the Underground Railroad. That had to be done in collaboration with the people in power and the people less powerless or lower caste. So there was a white resistance then called abolitionist. Today, the resistance is made up, again, of the people in power, white people, Asian people, indigenous people, and the Latinx people in Portland that marched daily on the Burnside Bridge, protesting the treatment and executions of Black Americans. Though constitutional interpretations and state-sanctioned laws have marginalized certain people in our society, Portland millennials and others have been particularly resilient in their efforts, and I'm very gratified by what I see in Weird Portland. We're going to keep Portland weird, and we're going to keep Portland active, I think. And they are now sort of like a beacon to the rest of the United States for what needs to be done to unseat racism. So number 6, let's deconstruct and legislate how to reshape qualified immunity for judges and police officers and officers of the court. That means no matter what they do, they are always given a verdict of innocence. Let's require law enforcement officers to be accountable when they break the law. And they did this in the 1820s, and here we are in the 2020s, and it's still happening. So this doesn't mean to be silent about state-sanctioned violence and opaque laws that are left to racially biased interpretation. That means we have to vote, we have to get out there, we have to support the democratic process that we already have in place. We have democratic processes already in place, but they must be enforced, and we must support them, and we must speak out if we want those to be maintained for our children and our grandchildren. Number 7, lastly, stop picking fights by calling other people racist. Everyone is on a continuum of self-awareness, and let's start our inter and intra community dialogues there with reasonableness. Some of us maintain a sense of self-righteous indignation as we demonize others, but let's start examining our internalized supremacist thinking proactively, and let's stop picking fights and be open to listening to other people, not necessarily for agreement, but for understanding. So you've got 7 pillars there that you can start with, your choice. Albert Einstein once said, "No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it." So if you Google Albert Einstein, you will find out he has plenty to say about racism and the caste system, even though he may not have used the word caste, because he understood, coming from Europe, what it means to be relegated to a lower caste or to a higher caste. So in summary, 1, change your narrative, your internal narrative and your external narrative. 2, be observant of the media portrayal of your group and others. Number 3, understand yours and others' arbitrary caste assignments, because that's exactly what they are. Study and acknowledge the truths of U.S. history. Denial is a big fat showstopper. Remember that there were white and indigenous abolitionists and Black freedom fighters since the beginning, and they are with us today, but our freedoms are very volatile and require constant feeding and support. Number 5, know that societal outcomes tell you where you've been. Number 6, let's reshape the laws like qualified immunity through legislation. And number 7, stop picking fights with people and learn to use respectful listening and dialogue. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Karen Haberman Trusty.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm going to give you some of my history and stuff. And so I'm speaking to you as a person who at 19 became actively involved in the civil rights movement, which was the best thing that ever happened to me, by the way, with SNCC, and ever since has cared deeply and tried to understand how in the world America is so schizophrenic about race. While I worked with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which Martin Luther King called the shock troops of the movement, which was founded and led by Black people, I really was able to see the genius of Black people's deep understanding, not only of racism in general, but specifically what would move white people's consciousness to a deeper understanding of race. I joke and I say, Black people have a PhD in racism, and white people may be coming out of kindergarten or in 3rd grade, but we haven't spent our whole lives talking about race in order to survive. And so I worked in the communications department, which was an elaborate news and journalism department that basically explained the civil rights movement to the American people. It was a weekly newsletter, The Student Voice, daily news reports sent out to all newspapers in the US and abroad. Each state had at least one Friends of SNCC to explain the movement, update the happenings, and get stories in the local press and fundraise. They also had a whole bunch of photographers that they hired as people who would take the real pictures. Then there were the freedom singers who traveled across the US, telling the movement stories, singing freedom songs, and again, fundraising. This department was headed by Julian Bond. The organization was nothing short of brilliant. I was a lowly bad typist who was thrilled to be working in this Black organization. It was there I saw my own limited understanding of race broaden, and I began to grasp what race was about in America. It was so exciting to be part of such a brilliant movement. And I often ask people, white activists, you need to be willing to take Black leadership. And that means you need to step back and see what happens and what things they will come up with in order to solve this problem. And they've always been way better than my ideas, I'll just say it that way. Since then, I've talked to people about my experiences, about my deep devotion to racial justice in this country, trying to help them understand how deeply embedded the division between Black and white, which is leading to all of these injustices. First, I spent a lot of time learning and experiencing Black culture through movies, books, plays, musical events, and everything I could find to understand more fully the Black experience, which of course, because I'm white, I can't really understand it. but I get glimmers of, and I also get deep appreciation for the resiliency and incredible soulful culture that they have developed partially because of their oppression. The question has always lingered for me. The understanding has become clearer and clearer that this is not a Black problem, but this is a white problem. Especially in the past, when Trayvon Martin was killed, and then Michael Brown was shot by police and left in the street for 4.5 hours, a movement called Black Lives Matter was born. When this movement started, I was so happy because finally people were starting to recognize that the reason that this movement was needed, it was because in the past, essentially Black lives did not matter. And Blacks were tragically killed and nobody noticed. This happened in the movement a lot. For the past 56 years, I've studied not only these things outside of me, but also I came to realize that in my upbringing and education, the central split in America was completely ignored. Because I was white, I was never taught about racism and indeed the caste system of America. I remember in SNCC, I was challenged to go work with white people, and I've been trying ever since. And again, one of the things I realized was that this ignorance and brainwashing is also within me. It's not just out there. It's not just the police, well, they are sterling examples of it often, but it's also within me. I've been studying this for 56 years and I still have racist thoughts that come up sometimes. The good news is that I see them. And the good news is that I can acknowledge them. And by acknowledging them, I don't have to act on them unconsciously most of the time. And if I do, it's usually littler things. I have learned partially by noticing the huge discrepancy between the daily white and Black experiences in this country. I'm going to suggest some things to you that you can do before you cavalierly jump to saying, I will do that. I would, like you, deeply consider the unfairness, the immorality of this caste system in America. If you are so moved to not only come to this workshop, but also really say to yourself, I want to do something. I want to look at this. I would like you to set an intention to not only do things outside of yourself to work for justice, but also commit to looking at your own self and where the literal brainwashing of America has influenced you even beyond what you consciously know. I find stuff coming up, I can't even believe it's in there. So don't be surprised. The first step of being an anti-racist is to commit to being an anti-racist and to commit to looking at the deep teachings of white America, which have allowed this system of white supremacy to stay in place in 1619 when the first slaves came to America. After you've made this commitment, and I really encourage you to, I will bring up some things you can do besides to learn the real history of America. The one where all men are not created equal, where slaves were 3/5 of a person, where slave patrols and local white militias were formed to bring slaves back in line and back to their owners. I would posit that you can trace those slave patrols and those militias to what is happening today with the police and with the militias that are forming in this country. Now I realize this is difficult information. It's painful, but I would posit that it's much more painful not to know this, to turn a blind eye to this past and to the insane damage that is being done to Black people in America, which also damages us by refusing to see it. Very recently, a new book came out, written by perhaps my favorite Black author, Isabel Wilkerson, Benjamin, I agree, called Caste. In this book, she makes an incredibly convincing argument that racism in America is really a caste system in America based on the superficial differences of race or color of one's skin. What I liked about that, when I read that, when I was reading this book, I went, oh, that's why it's so intractable. You look at caste systems in India and other places, and it's dug in there. That's how it's in this country. She also states that the Nazis in Germany literally came to America before they took power and studied how racism worked and functioned in America, and then went back to Germany and modeled their atrocious extermination of Jewish people after our own racist system. When the Nazis were first beginning, they argued that the US system was too harsh. They didn't want to go that harsh. It took them about 1.5 years or 2 years to get that harsh. So in the beginnings of this study, of this transformation of yourself into an anti-racist, you must take the bull by the horns, so to speak, and begin a rigorous study of Black history in America and begin to embed yourself in Black culture. This would mean that you would not only read history, attend other workshops, see the incredible many movies, including 13th, When They See Us, and Just Mercy. And last but not least, attend Barbara's and my Workshop 101, November 15th. I say this with a smile on my face because I'm not really saying all of this to lead you into our workshop. If you're able, attend some of the peaceful demonstrations in Portland when they happen. Check out events at Don't Shoot Portland, which is the closest group to SNCC that I've seen since I've been working with SNCC. And join the NAACP, which is the oldest civil rights organization in the US. It's founded by both Black and white leaders, Jewish leaders actually. Also attend many of the other Zoom meetings all over the place about race. Read CAST, read the New York Times Magazine section called 1619, and Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. While you're doing this, please pay attention to your own responses, to your own feelings of, oh my God, how could this have happened? How could this still be happening? Be gentle with yourself as you let in this shock and dismay of this information. When you feel this, you will know that you've begun to be an anti-racist. You do not need to do this work all on your own, although much of this work is a solitary experience of exploring your own attitudes toward race. And you have to give yourself the benefit that we were like born into an ocean of racism, and we were taught this way. It's not really something that we've chosen in a certain sense, so give yourself a break. This system, and it is truly a system, was set up for the economic profit and benefit of the very wealthy and indeed the 1%. They have easily been able, by hiding the true history of America, to keep us divided through the use of racial divisions and racial hatred. It is time for this to stop. It is time for all of us as white people in America to decide to step forward and care and talk to other white people and explore ourselves, to read, to educate ourselves as to how this has worked. One of my suggestions for you is to talk to 2 other white people per week about race. It's going to be very difficult at first. You're going to be awkward. You're going to worry. You say saying. You're going to walk away from the conversation going, oh, I should have said that. But with practice and effort, you'll find that it will be increasingly easy to talk to other people about race. If somebody says, how are you? What have you been up to? You can say, oh, I just took this interesting workshop on how to be an anti-racist. And then you tell them what you got out of it. And then half your weekly assignment will be done. You'll be richly rewarded for this work, where you will soon realize, if you haven't already, how important this work is for all of us. It will set us free, and it will make America truly the land of the free. At this point in history, we as white people may feel somewhat free and somewhat safe, but that is just our privilege as white people. I cannot begin to tell you how good it feels to work for justice and equality. While it's not always easy, there's something that happens inside of you when you know that you're helping move yourself forward, as well as your community, and as well as this nation, to finally remove this caste system and allow everyone to be truly themselves. Thank you for listening. I really encourage you to ask questions later in this workshop, for it is your questions, your doubts, your misunderstanding, your confusion that is holding you back from this marvelous journey. Thank you.
So are we ready to jump into the breakout rooms?
Barbara?
Barbara, Benjamin, should we jump into the breakout rooms?
You're on mute.
Unmute now. Okay. All right. I'm back. Hi. Thank you, Karen. Yes. And so here's the question. And thank you for all the questions that have been coming into the chat room. I've been trying to answer them as they come in. The big question for you to go into your breakout rooms and discuss with a much smaller group is, how have you as an individual, this is very personal, benefited from the current caste system that you've been assigned to? And the second question for you is, how have you been marginalized by the current caste system that you've been assigned to in this country? Whatever caste or class or category or ethnic group you identify with. So you're going to go away for 10 minutes and discuss that, and then come back with 2 poignant things that you discovered in your smaller group, and then report them back into the larger learning circle. If you have any questions, we'll be here. Feel free to put it in the chat room, and I think the question may go with you to the chat room as well.
All right, I'm gonna put you into rooms. See you in a few.
So I'll talk about Seattle and what they've done. There's one.
Welcome back, everybody. Barbara, I think
we're ready to roll.
we're good.
Okay, they get to speak first. All right, so everybody back. Thank you for breaking out into those smaller sessions to talk about the caste system. Can you guess what book Karen and I just read? So we would ask that you choose one person out of your groups and have that person speak for 1 minute about the most stunning findings that you found. One, on the positive, how has your group been favored by the caste system? And 2, how has your group been disfavored or marginalized by the caste system? So everybody pick a spokesperson, and we will, if we can see the whole screen now, we can just ask people maybe to volunteer group number 1, group number 2, group number 3, and tell us what they found.
Who'd like to go first?
Okay, you're muted.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Oh, sorry, I'll unmute people. All right, who wants to go? Sorry, let's try that one more time.
Can I speak for group 7 first, or do we need to go in order of 1, 2?
Go ahead.
I think there were some good comments from group 7. Notably, one of us said access to healthcare was something where they have benefited. I spoke about growing up in a rural community and still getting a lot of opportunities, I think based on my skin color. And someone else talked about how even though they grew up in a town and a city that had a lot of diversity, it was still segregated. There was the other side of town. And so I think, and to add to that, and then someone spoke about how in their own family, they have family members who are not white, and how they get looks, they get, ooh, what's this white person doing with these non-white people? So all that to say, I think those were some of the ways that I think our group talked about benefiting. And then no one really said anything about feeling marginalized ever, really. Maybe an instance here or there about language use. We talked about the phrase, oh, I don't want to get Jewed out of some money or something like that, but nothing directly like, what we might see recently. So that was the talk of Group 7.
All right, thank you. Next group.
I'll go for my group. We did not get too far into the conversation around disadvantages, so I'll just briefly talk on that after, but we talked about both really big topics and small topics around advantages or benefits that we've received from this caste system in the US. And they touch on a lot of things that we have been talking about for months. So housing and the ability to choose to live where you want to live and find housing and not feel that you're excluded, which has happened over generations. We talked about wealth accrual and how that is such a big benefit to be able to know that you've got a safety net, and it allows you to take risks in a certain way. It allows you to afford college or find housing and those kinds of things. And we talked about employment benefits that come from skin color and race and other parts of the identity. And then smaller things, which are kind of everyday advantages. Somebody in our group talked about how if she needs to use a public bathroom in a restaurant or in a coffee shop, she goes in and is never questioned about whether she belongs there or whether she should have access to this very simple need. So those were some of the benefits that we talked about. And then the one that we didn't really get, like I said, into the disadvantages, but one thing that did get mentioned is someone in our group was an immigrant, but a white-skinned immigrant, and how that her experience is completely different from what the media portrays and what we believe to be the most common immigrant experience in here. And so it wasn't as much as of a disadvantage as just sort of this recognition of real differences in how we perceive people based on skin color and what we expect from their experience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Next group.
I'll go for our group. I will almost ditto that exact, it was like we were sharing groups. We talked a little bit about feeling secure when you walk outside and you can go about your daily business as a white person and not have to worry about being arrested or taken by the police. We talked a lot about wealth and passing down from generation. And we got this great statistic from a Portland Homeless Family Solutions presentation that I attended that said that the average white family transfers $140,000 between generations, where the average Black family transfers only $9,300 between generations, and how that pass down of wealth really can change what opportunities, what neighborhood you live in, what schools you go to, what education is available to you. And that really will make all of the difference in terms of what opportunities are given to you. And our group was feeling that we had that, some of that privilege handed down to us, and recognize that others do not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next group. We have another group, a shy group.
I guess I could speak for our group.
Okay.
We had a very small group, But we were talking about, I guess, more of the difficulties. My partner was discussing how she lives in a very integrated community, but she was having discussion recently with a neighbor, and at one point in the conversation, the neighbor kind of sort of said, well, I don't know, remember what she exactly said, but more or less said, oh, well, you wouldn't understand, you're not Black. It was sort of like she felt totally excluded and was kind of surprised because they had been neighbors a long time and very friendly. So just the sense, even when you feel you belong or that you're close, there's some barriers that still exist. And she was also saying that she'd always thought because she had very good relationships with African Americans in her neighborhood, and she had many Black friends, that just having friends, sometimes people feel like, oh, I have a lot of Black friends, that somehow that meant she was all set and didn't have to really deal too much with racism, but that's only a small piece, that there's still many divisions and many issues. So that was one piece. And we also talked about feeling discriminated against by being Jewish and comments people make. And we had two different tacks of dealing with it. One was to just not say anything and kind of not necessarily reveal you were Jewish. And the other was to just totally confront the person. And then in future situations, just make it clear right up front that you were Jewish to kind of prevent the person, but didn't mean you were changing their mind, or it was just a way. Anyway, that was some of the things we talked about.
All right, thank you very much. Anybody else? Next group.
I'll say a few things, only that we talked a lot about what other people have already said. But one person just mentioned that her path to be a swimmer and a swim instructor, you know, that her journey in her career, you know, comes from the white privilege that she had. Again, we just, you know, we talked about the wealth and the opportunities we've had, whether it's to go to college, to travel, to send our kids to private school, to send our kids to summer camp, to really not question or worry about anything we do. We can do whatever we need to. Yeah, so, but otherwise it was similar to everyone else.
Okay. Thank you. Next group.
I can go for our group.
Okay, thank you.
We spoke a little bit of, all of us talked about how we, you know, even if we didn't have a very wealthy background, we all had the ability to go to college, and it was just assumed that we were going to go to college. So all of us in our group had, you know, advanced degrees.
If you try again, we can let you back in.
And so, you know, we talked about that, and then we didn't have to worry about, you know, being in debt for the rest of our lives. It's, you know, some of us had our parents to help us. And then also, you know, we will never know the extent to which having light colored skin will help us in interviews or job applications or college interviews, because, you know, not being Black or not having a, you know, Black sounding name on a resume, we would never know the benefit that we actually received from that. And then we talked a little bit as far as the, you know, the disadvantages. You know, we've all experienced some kind of anti-Semitic comments and actions throughout our lives. And I spoke a little about just, you know, started my business as a female business owner, some of the things and controversies that I ran into. And then, you know, depending on where our careers were, like two people in our group were in social work, and they didn't feel that discrimination. Whereas in the medical field, there's a little bit more of the, if you're a male, kind of assuming you're a doctor, and if you're not you know, if you're female, you're just assumed to be a nurse or something else. And then I noticed when I got pregnant, I definitely had a lot of sexism as far as, you know, people asking me if I'm going to go back to work after having a baby, or, you know, if I'm going to do certain things after becoming a mother, or after.
Sexism, not racism, right?
Right.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next group, if there is one left. I know a lot of people had to leave at 12 noon or at 1. Is that our last group?
I could talk for my group if we got another sec. It's mostly, I think we've mostly covered the things that we talked about, but we kind of focused on the ease that we can move through the world as white people. You know, you sort of just walk out of your house and you move about your day without people noticing you, and that just kind of makes everything easier. We also talked about the neighborhoods that we are able to live in, and how much of that is probably due to either the color of our skin now or perhaps our ancestors that came before us.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anybody else left that has not spoken yet about advantages or disadvantages of your assigned or perceived caste system? Okay, so here's what I heard. I'm just going to summarize what I think I heard. I heard about legacy wealth, the passing on of wealth from one generation to the next, which is a direct result of the capitalism foundation built in the 1600s for people with white skin. And then I also heard about safety, advantage of being safe and not feeling like if you get stopped by a police officer, it's going to be your death. I also heard housing advantages. You could basically live where you wanted to, but being a native of Portland, I can tell you that Jewish people were discriminated against and redlined until 1957 in Portland. And then it went away, and others were still in the discriminated group for housing. Invisibility, I love that one. I think it's so cool when people can't figure out what you are. So then they have to be careful about what they say at all times, since they don't know, like not mentioning that you're Jewish if they don't know it, or mentioning it so you don't have to even get involved in some twisted conversation of demonization of your particular ethnic group. And then I heard an advantage of being college bound. It was always expected that you'd go to college, and that too is generational. The greatest amount of educated people in our country came about after World War II, and that's for white people. So that happened with the GI Bill. And then the advantages of employment, I heard that as an advantage. And that means that when you're in front of someone, or perhaps when they see your name, you're not going to be discriminated against. But people with names like Shaniqua and LaQuisha and Mohammed, they're probably going to be discriminated against on paper before they even get in front of an HR person. I used to be an employment representative, so I know that that happens. I also know that they did a study 10 years ago and found out that if you were a white felon, I think the study was done in Chicago, you had a better chance of getting a job than an African-American male with a master's degree. So that definitely makes sense. So now that you understand your caste group and understand your personal experiences and the caste groups of others to a degree, you must know that the people in power in any generation of reform and reconciliation are the ones that actually have to run it into the end zone. Now, there have been white abolitionists, there have been Black abolitionists, there have been Native American or indigenous people, but the people that have the greatest amount of power are the ones in the greatest position to challenge the systems that are being held in place that hold others in their respective caste. Karen, any comments?
Well, I just wanted to mention about the friendship, the woman that talked about how, you know, she felt like maybe the friendships with Black people that she had with Black people were on shaky grounds. And what I would say is that it's really important to talk about race. If you have a friend, is to bring it up and try to understand their experience, and not just, like, I remember I was in a class at PSU, and a lot of the students said they had interracial friends. And so I asked the white kids, I said, how many of you actually had a conversation about their friends, their black friends' experiences in this world? And nobody raised their hand. So it can just be totally ignored. And you know, and so as somebody who has black friends and has stumbled and made mistakes, and it's painful, and I usually take the pain away from in the presence of the black person, because it's my pain and all that. But it's important to have, there's a way that you can actually become deeper friends if you have that conversation. And it's not an easy conversation, and maybe the black person, and you can answer me about this, Barbara, maybe I'm off base here, but that's what I have felt, that if it's acknowledged and there's some effort that you're going to understand their experience, not just by asking them, but also by reading, by doing some of the stuff that we've been talking about, then you know, it's a more equal friendship in a certain kind of way.
And please don't tell, if you have black friends, please don't interpret or tell them what their experience is or was. Yeah, that's probably a big fat faux pas. You can have relationships, have real conversations, and understand that they've had an experience that you have not had. And so just listen to it.
Yeah.
But don't interpret for them, or what we used to call in gender dynamics, mansplaining. I call it, don't white-splain their experience and tell them that they were oversensitive, and are you sure that this was not just an isolated incident? That is just a terrible way to have a relationship with a person that's not a member of your group. All right, in summary, the pandemic has disrupted the present, but this is our chance to jump into the game of double Dutch jump rope, and that's exactly what it is, to remake the future. This is a transformational time and an opportunity for real change at a systemic level. In conjunction with that, be glad that the BLM movement has brought people of every stripe from numerous countries into the limelight, demanding systemic change for our caste systems. And again, the beauty of anti-racism work is that you don't need to be free of racism to start this journey. You don't need a PhD or a JD. It's a commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including yourself, without endangering your well-being. If you decide to join any of the anti-racist organizations that I put into the chat room, let go of the notion that it must be white-led. That's grounded in white supremacy. You wouldn't ask a man to lead a feminist movement. Why would you ask white people to lead you to the answers without the experiences of being the target of systemic racism? So take a look at the Black Lives Movement organization, Don't Shoot Portland, the Urban League, and specifically Reimagine Oregon, which is a multiracial organization, and also SURGE, which is standing up for racial justice, and that is led by white people. And remember that race trumps everything in the US, including class. So if you try to equate class with race, it really shouldn't work. All right, I think with that, I want to thank Rabbi Benjamin and Saul and Aaron for even suggesting that we come and be a part of your learning circle. Keep in mind that we're all learning. Give yourselves a break and allow yourself to make mistakes and to continue the learning process. I want to thank everybody here for their participation and for being here. And Karen has the final closing.
She's going to pass it to me afterwards, but yeah, go ahead,
No.
Karen.
So I just like to say that I encourage you to sign up for Barbara and my workshops, which is literally a lot of the background information that you need to understand the huge racial divide and injustice. And we have a series from 101 to 104. You'll be getting an email that will talk about the workshops. They help explain what I call white identity formation in this country, which is so precious to us, even if we don't know it. It gives us a lot of advantages. And Barbara will explain how racism and caste was embedded in Oregon history and the personal and political impact of racism on Black Americans. So you'll get an email that tells you the dates and times and a link to sign up, and then also a way to get on our mailing list. So thank you very much for participating, and we'll see you again.
So thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Rabbi Benjamin, who had to jump off. I want to thank our sponsors. I know we didn't get to a lot of questions, but I really appreciate everyone's input and the conversations that we had. I want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank Congregation Neve Shalom's COVID-19 Outreach and Services, which was our presenting sponsor. And on Sunday from 1 to 3, the team will be here at the MJCC to give out masks and hand sanitizer and fall-themed goodies. And if you want a flu shot, you can get your flu shot here. I want to thank our series sponsors, Richard Barker Wealth Management of Merrill Lynch, Barry and Carla Benson, First Republic Bank, Gewurz Menashe, Portland State University, Jonathan Singer of Barg Singer PC, the Jerry and Helen Stern Grandchildren's Fund of OJCF, and Turner Construction Company. I want to thank our event sponsor, Income Property Management, and our next panel, November 19th, 2020 at noon, The Business of Cannabis with Jeanette Ward Horton from New Leaf Project, Jeff Mazer, who's the CFO of Wild, and Jeff Sugarman, who's the Chief Compliance Officer for Groundworks. So the third Thursday at noon, we will be back here, and we'll follow up with an email. Thanks everyone so much, and stay healthy, and don't forget to vote.